Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Beyond podcast. I'm your host, Liam Dalton. If you're new around here, consider subscribing or following the show. And if you like the podcast, you like what we do over here, give us a like, rating, review, comment, whatever you're on. Help us grow, help support the show. Sharing is always a great way. Tell your friends, families about it. And yeah, we'll get the word out, and it's a great way to support me and what we're doing here. So all that would be really appreciated. We have an amazing guest on today, such a unique topic we're going to discuss today, something I think that's really going to be on the forefront of health and wellness moving forward and fits really well into kind of what we're talking about here. So I'm really eager to kind of delve into to this topic, right, and see how we can apply it, and really, really eager to see how it unfolds in the next little while. So, because I do think that this is kind of a newer thing, at least it is to
hmm
me. I haven't really heard of it too much before. So,
Mm.
without further ado, Kyla, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Honestly, I'm so excited to be here and talk about this. I think that, yeah, like you said, this is really going to be something that I think a lot of people are going to be talking about in the future, and I can't wait to talk to you about it.
Great, great.
hmm
Yeah, and I think it really fits into sort of the train model as well. I know that
hmm
a lot of times, alternative medicines and health can be kind of tricky, and, things kind of get greenwashed and stuff like that. But I think this is really, really hitting the nail on the head. So I want to ask, before we get into it, a little introductory question. What is health? What does it mean to you? How does it manifest? What does it look like? You take it any direction you'd like. I'll give you the floor and we'll go from there.
Sure. So I'm part of my health history is that I have Crohn's disease, which is an autoimmune condition. So I'm going to say my definition of health in regards to those of us with autoimmune disease. So I think that it probably can be defined as achieving a state where the body and the immune system function in harmony, which is very hard to do if you have an autoimmune disease. Um, Specifically, this would involve the absence of symptoms, most importantly, but also ongoing sustained wellness. So, beyond just the absence of symptoms, this would mean being resilient to triggers, which is a huge thing if you have inflammatory bowel disease like I do, and having an excellent quality of life that takes into account physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health. And honestly, I think and I know that a lot of this stems from our gut ecosystem and the importance of diversity there.
It's great. I really love how you tie that into your own story and
Mm.
what we're going to kind of discuss today. I think that's fantastic. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your own story and journey and how you even how you got here, because it's such a unique thing, and I'm just really eager to hear how it came to this point, and maybe even how it helped you as well.
Yeah, sure. So, um, first, the topic we're talking about is Helminthic therapy, which I will get into a little bit later what that means. But um, my story, I guess, is I have Crohn's disease, like I mentioned, which is inflammatory bowel disease. It's probably the worst digestive disorder that a human can have, and I have really suffered with it, just like a lot of people with IBD have. Um, Basically, I was diagnosed, or I've been sick, sorry, since 2010, after a pretty significant Salmonella event in first year of university, coupled with a stressful time in my life. I just started uni, and I just basically never really got better from that. After before that I did not have Crohn's disease, and after I had Crohn's disease, I think that was a little bit of a spark for me. Um, and I wasn't diagnosed until 2015. I just progressively got worse and worse throughout that time. I was told I had IBS. I was kind of ignored by my doctors. Finally got a diagnosis in 2015, went on all the medications and then off of them, trying to manage it myself. And yeah, I had a really rough time. Crohn's just basically got worse and worse for me. It started affecting basically all aspects of my life. By 2019, I started a pretty severe flare with the disease, and I really didn't actually get better until I started doing Helminths. So I was pretty much in a flare nonstop for 4 years. That's 4 years of every day feeling unwell. Um, in that time, I had 6 surgeries, related to my Crohn's disease. Luckily, never having any of my bowel removed, but 6 surgeries related to the disease. I had developed total food intolerance. So every single thing that I ate would cause a negative reaction in my body. I would be vomiting multiple times a week. Other common side effects or symptoms of Crohn's disease, like bloody diarrhea, abdominal pain, nausea, just not nice things to live with at all. Um, I would say that I basically had like complete digestive breakdown. Like my body was not able to digest at this point. I was on drinking meal replacement shakes just to try and get some of my calories in. And yeah, I had a surgery for my Crohn's, and afterwards I was feeling a little bit better, and I was kind of getting a glimpse at like what it feels like to be well, you know, a little bit better. And then all of a sudden I got sick again. You know, it was so short lived, and I was devastated. I was desperate. And I posted on a Facebook group just asking people for advice. What should I do? I feel like I'm trying everything. You know, I'm doing all the natural health things I can think of. I'm meditating, I'm doing yoga, I'm following a clean diet. And I'm still getting worse, you know, and one of the comments was Helminthic therapy completely changed the game for me. And I mean, a couple of people commented different things, and I kind of looked into them, and none of them really made a lot of sense. And when I first read about Helminths, I mean, my initial reaction was, ew. No way. I'm not doing that. There's no way. But when I started to look into it, I was like, hey, this actually really makes sense. This really might be an underlying reason why we have autoimmune disease. I need to look into this further. And once I started reading some of the resources available and reading some of the scientific papers, and I joined the Facebook group, I heard other people's stories. Like, honestly, I was convinced, and I've basically become obsessed with the idea that, yeah, it's massive, actually.
That's really cool. Really
Mm-hmm.
cool. So what are helminths? What is helminth therapy? What does it involve? Like how do you
Yeah.
what even is it?
Yeah, what is it? What is it? Totally. That's a good place to start. It's not really a
Yeah.
word that I had ever heard before this person reached out to me. It's not something that you hear in everyday conversation, and it's definitely not something you hear when the average person is talking about autoimmune disease or inflammatory bowel diseases. But it's intrinsically linked, and it's definitely something that we need to start talking about. So yeah, helminths are, in short, parasitic worms that live inside the bodies of humans or animals. Um, they are considered parasites because they depend on a host for survival. They're multicellular organisms. They're not all microscopic. They're not necessarily part of the gut microbiome. They're more of a macro species, um, especially in adult stages, I should say. But they are not truly parasitic in that a true parasite is where one species benefits and one species is harmed. So a parasite would be something living in our body and our health is harmed, or our bodies are somehow worse off as a result of this relationship. But the helminths used in this therapy, and in fact, many helminths and actually many symbiotes that live across our body and in it, on it, they're actually more what's called mutualists, which is a type of parasite, but it's where both species benefit from the relationship in a complex symbiotic type of relationship that's really not fully understood, but is basically essential for our survival. And these relationships exist all over our body, but we're talking specifically about the ones in our guts related to helminths.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. So like they do exist in like a natural order. Like, we're meant to have them
T-
at all times in
totally.
a way.
But
Yeah,
totally. Like,
cool.
yeah, basically the idea is that a human living out in nature would be constantly exposed to all parasites, basically. You can't be out in nature and not exposed to parasites. That's where they live. So a
Yeah.
human living out in nature would be constantly exposed to them when they drink water from a stream, when they eat unprocessed foods from a tree, especially if they were to eat animal products. I mean, animal products contain parasites. So especially raw ones and unprocessed animal products. And I don't necessarily think I'm not saying that in a negative way, you know. I'm not saying all parasites are beneficial, but there are lots that provide benefit to some degree.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so a human in nature would definitely be exposed, and lots of research suggests that human the human immune system has actually evolved to require this exposure to parasites in order to function properly.
Interesting. So when you tie it back to kind of your initial, you said you had an exposure to like a salmonella event,
Mm-hmm.
and ever
Mm-hmm.
since then, like how does the Helminths kind of interact with the rest of the microbiome and stuff like that? Is there any sort of literature on that? Any thoughts behind that
Sure,
area?
sure, of course. So I'm definitely not going to call myself an expert in the field, and I encourage anyone who's interested in this topic to learn about it, but really there aren't very many people talking about it. So I'm going to do it. um, but yeah, there are a couple of ways that the helminths interact with the microbiome specifically. And there has been research that's shown that it can increase gut microbiome diversity, probably by reducing inflammation and allowing more of the microbe or more of the gastrointestinal tract to be habitable. Um,
Hmm.
and there is also research that suggests that helminth exposure can actually heal the intestinal lining. So if you have what a lot of people will call leaky gut syndrome, where your body is so inflamed that you actually have small micro perforations where small bits of your food and outside external stimuli that you've swallowed and gone into your gut can then leak into your body and cause an immune reaction. The helminths can actually help to um, tighten that gut integrity and heal leaky gut syndrome, which is one of the underlying factors in a lot of gut digestive related disorders. So they can increase gut microbiome diversity, probably by decreasing inflammation, and they can help heal leaky gut, which can help with, again, microbiome diversity. But it is important to realize that the Helminth level of your gut ecosystem, I'll call it, not microbiome, is different than the microbiome, and we get them from different ways. They live in the body in different ways, and they play a different role in the body. They're really not the same thing.
Very interesting. Very
Mm-hmm.
interesting. So how do they kind of differ? Like, where do we actually get them? Like, do we get
Mm-hmm.
them from an external sources, you
Mm-hmm.
think? Yeah?
Yeah. Well, so I'll explain it in relation to how we get parts of our microbiome. So our microbiome, we get a lot of it from
Sure.
the vaginal canal when we're born, from our mothers. Super important. It's really the foundation for our immune system and our gut microbiome, sorry. And then other than that, we get the rest of our gut microbiome from exposure during our lifetime. So what we eat, pre and probiotic foods, so essential. Anything we breathe in from the atmosphere, and of course, interacting with other people. Now, helminths are different. They only come from outside sources. We cannot get them from our mother, as far as I'm aware. And you need to be exposed to them usually from nature or from other humans directly, usually in our feces. That's how it's done. So basically, a human living out in nature would constantly be exposed to them because humans would be exposed to them from touching other animals, from eating meat, from drinking raw, unprocessed water, and then we would then poop outside, and this would then be spread among the community, and we would share helminths and other parasites this way. So basically, since the rise of indoor toilets, which really is only a technology from about the last 150 to 200 years ago, like our grandparents may not have had access to consistently indoor toilets. It's a relatively new phenomenon. This improvement in our hygiene, which is necessary for modern living, has basically changed the life cycle of helminths, because helminths need to spend some of their life cycle inside the body and some of it outside the body. And if they are pooped into a toilet and they cannot live in the septic system, they need to live in soil, they're gone. That life cycle is cut short, and basically helminths become a almost extinct or rare.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
it
So
is.
how does that tie into sort of this hygiene hypothesis, this like biota alteration
Hmm.
theory?
Hmm. Yeah. So many people may have heard of the hygiene hypothesis. That's basically the idea that we need to be exposed to microbes in order for our immune system to function correctly. But it doesn't really encapsulate all of the components of modern society that actually have changed our gut ecosystem. It's not just hygiene. It's not. It's living indoors and working indoors, lack of vitamin D exposure. It's the depletion of our soil quality, which has had huge implications on our food quality and our exposure to parasites and living creatures. Um, the Biota alteration also talks about cultural changes, so living in cities, moving more into concrete jungles rather than jungles that consist of trees and living creatures. This all basically has decreased the diversity in our gut ecosystem, which makes us more susceptible to autoimmune diseases. So it has, of course, affected our microbiome, specifically the changes to our diet and eating a standard American diet, which consists of pro-inflammatory processed foods. But it also, these changes have separated us from helminths. We are no longer exposed to helminths in a natural way throughout our natural human life. And this change has been drastic for our interior climate. And it has had and will continue to have profound effects unless we do something about it. And I'm definitely not suggesting that we all go and poop outdoors and start drinking river water. Like that's not what I want. But the magic of Helminthic therapy is that we don't actually have to do that. You know, we can have the best of both worlds.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And it's like almost like a response to living in these hyper modernized environments, right? Like where we
Totally.
are so much has changed, like you're mentioning, right? Like
Mhm.
from a food standpoint. And I mean really
Mhm.
like you want to trace it back, like the quality of the soil is terrible right now. So really
It's
curious, like do you think there's like a deficiency of helminths like in the physical environment? Is that kind of what you're saying here? Like obviously when you're in cities, everything's concrete. There's no
mhm.
soil around. You mentioned they have to live in soil. So
Mhm.
obviously when you're in a city, there's nothing
Mhm.
there. But even like our soils, like I'm sure they can't thrive in deficient soils.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
would you agree with that?
100%. I really think that what you're saying is important. And I actually did a little bit of research specifically on this for this podcast. So, Nicator americanus, human hookworm, one of the species of helminth that I take, it used to be prolific in tropical climates of North America. So, the warmer parts of the USA, essentially, not Canada, not where we're from. But yeah, in the southern United States, it was prolific. And now, due to modern hygiene essentially is what we can attribute it to. The species that I'm taking is now considered a rare species. It's no longer prolific. It is only found under certain conditions in certain areas. It's not widespread like it once was. And that is, yes, because the human hookworm requires, as part of its life cycle to live inside a human and live outside in soil to complete its life cycle. If that chain is broken and it's no longer exposed to soil, or it's no longer exposed to humans, they become less common. So yes, I would say, and I hear this argument all the time, and I tell people, oh, you need to get helminths from nature. Yes, in theory, you need to get helminths from nature, but people say to me all the time, oh, well, I walk outside barefoot because I live in Australia. Everyone walks barefoot. Okay. So people go, oh, I'm exposed to nature all the time. I touch nature all the time. I walk barefoot, which is important. But if there's no helminths living in the soil, it's not going to have the same effect and the same impact as doing something like Helminthic therapy, which is going to give you controlled, specific, intentional infections with specific beneficial parasites as well.
Very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I wonder like so obviously like in a natural order, a baby is going to be born and pretty well exposed to it, almost right away.
Totally.
They're not. they're not being born in these sterile environments
Mm-mm.
like hospitals and
Like
stuff like that, and
hospitals.
even like home. Like if your home is very sterile, it's going to have a similar effect, and it's like,
Hmm.
when's that baby first going to be even
Hmm.
have the opportunity? Say there were prolific helminths around, when would a baby even have the opportunity? You don't see too many babies out playing in the ground anymore, like laying on the
No.
laying
Well,
on the dirt.
but even more recently, we had a lot of babies that would have maybe been exposed to microbes or parasites from animals at home, either domesticated animals or
Oh,
just your dogs and cats. But now it's becoming so common to deworm your dog, deworm your cat. It's like almost you're a bad pet owner if you don't. You don't have the same benefits of
wow.
interacting with your domesticated animals if they don't contain parasites. That's what the benefit is.
Wow.
Yeah,
Oh yeah,
super
that's really
interesting.
interesting.
I
Never thought of that.
Yeah, it's I've actually read a paper about this in Australia, how certain types of parasites that are from dogs, um, certain types of parasitic anti-parasitic tablets are not working for them anymore because they're actually becoming resistant to them. But also the types of parasites that they're treating are becoming so much less common because they just like with the human helminths, they can't complete their life cycle because they're being eradicated.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting topic too. Like we talk about that a little bit, the like the resistance, right? And I think the resistance, it shows how important these things are. Like if an animal, or if a, microorganism or parasite or whatever is trying to like overcome being
Hmm.
eradicated,
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
that just shows how important it is for your health, right? Like so
Totally. And this is how the
um
immune system evolved, right? This is how the immune system has evolved, and this is why essentially we need helminths because we have over the history of humans for all of our entire existence have been exposed constantly throughout our whole entire life to various parasites, helminths, microbes, everything. Our immune system react evolved to react to these, so that we aren't overrun with parasites and we can live in a peaceful symbiotic existence. And
mhm.
within 200 years, let's say, that's maybe 150 years, we've basically eradicated these parasites. And now our immune systems, in some cases, are becoming completely overreactive, completely haywire. And as a result, we are getting autoimmune diseases. Immune diseases where the body is attacking itself because it's so overreacted and not modulated. There's nothing there controlling it. Basically, the helminths are like the police, if you can think of that in a positive way, the regulators, I should
Yeah,
say, of the immune system. And without them, the immune
sure.
system can run haywire.
Yeah, I'm just like, thinking about how this really ties into what we're talking about over here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, um, we know that, there's lots of really interesting studies too that parasites can even like that they regulate even the microbiome too, right? Like when we have these larger organisms, right, they can relieve the imbalances of sort of the micro um aspect of things there, which I think is an interesting
Well,
area as well. And I think you're making a great point here with the overreactivity of the body to these, external
mm,
organisms.
mm,
Um, like even now, you can get hookworm in your foot, and then you have a
mm-hmm,
rash
mm-hmm,
associated with this
mm-hmm,
parasite, right? But
mm-hmm,
perhaps it's just because the body's never just doesn't have any hook, like it doesn't have that in it, it doesn't have the knowledge of it, it doesn't know how to react to it, so it views it as this external thing that's
mm-hmm.
foreign to the body, because it is foreign to the body because you don't have it in you, your body's not used to it.
Exactly.
You should know what it is, but
Yeah.
the absence of it, I mean, it
Yeah.
creates this imbalance in your own internal environment and your own internal knowledge.
I was just going to say, you can actually see this when people start Helminthic therapy. When they begin to use human hookworm, NA, the type that I'm taking, their immune system can and will have the most significant reaction the first time it's exposed to that helminth, because probably it hasn't been exposed to it maybe ever before, or not in a very consistent way. So after, because you do continually redose when you're doing the therapy, the second, third, and ongoing time you expose yourself to this parasite, your immune system has a less significant reaction to the parasite and a more like level it's more level, the reaction essentially. So yeah, what you're saying is essentially true. And when the parasite does go into your skin, because I take human hookworm through my arm, I can see the rash. I see it on my arm. It's mostly related, in my experience, to people's unique immune system reaction, but also how many go into your body. But that is your immune system starting to react to the parasite in your body, is where it enters your skin. That's the beginning of the immune reaction, which is really interesting.
Hmm. I know you're a little familiar with kind of my train of thought here, and
Mm-hmm,
we don't say that there are any bad parasites or microbes or anything like that, right? And
mm-hmm,
that
mm-hmm,
they all play some sort of beneficial role in response to a toxicity or a diseased environment, you know. So
mm.
when we think of the immune system too, we think of it working with these organisms, right? Like and developing kind of a relationship, right? 'Cause I just recorded a video for YouTube on the immune system and all the misconceptions there, right? It's like less of a defense mechanism and more of like a symbiotic relationship with microbes and so-called parasites and stuff like that. And
Totally.
we have immune structures, we have these white blood cells, and we have immune responses, right? Like we
Mm-hmm,
have
mm-hmm.
inflammation and stuff like that. And obviously, like um, we're not kind of denying that, right? It's
No.
more of this relationship of working with the parasite, right? Like the immune properties are kind of working with these parasites, kind of getting used to them, seeing how they're supposed to interact so they can help clean up the environment, how they can help regulate the
Yeah.
environment, how they can help just be in this balance and homeostasis.
Well, and I actually think a really important question, an interesting thing to consider is in regards to helminth exposure and human immune evolution, which actually came first, the exposure to the helminths or the immune reaction? And I would actually argue that exposure to helminths came first and the immune system reaction came second, because helminths have been around for a long time. They're more simple celled
Exactly.
organisms, and if we
Yeah.
if we can agree that the helminth exposure occurred first, then the evolutionary changes to our immune system occurred. Okay, then we can argue that humans actually need helminths for ideal immune function. We literally cannot have ideal immune function without exposure to these parasitic worms. And I think
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing I've been thinking about, which one came first. And I've actually read some research arguing that certain parts of the immune system, I actually have the name written down here, E2CM, evolved specifically in response to Helminth infection, meaning that if we don't have Helminth infection, our immune systems can go haywire, which means that they're essential. Um, and
Yeah.
if you think about it in regards to how helminths actually work with the immune system, so like how helminths actually work is when they're inside the body, once they're inside the GI tract, they secrete molecules that reduce inflammation and suppress or modulate overactive immune response. Okay, so they
Mhm.
do this by influencing immune pathways and promoting T regulatory cells, otherwise known as Tregs. You hear about them talked about sometimes in IBD literature. Um, their role is basically to help maintain immune balance in the body. So the helminths secrete molecules that promote Tregs. These Tregs help modulate the immune pathways. Um, and it's actually been researched which of the specific immune pathways these helminths actually modulate, which is really important if we want to discuss which autoimmune diseases these helminths can be beneficial for. Basically, helminths shift the immune response from pro-inflammatory Th1 to and Th17. So Th1 and Th17 dominance, which is quite prolific in many autoimmune diseases, and it shifts that immune response to anti-inflammatory Th2, which means that any autoimmune disease that's associated with Th1 or Th17 immune responses, which includes IBD, MS, celiac disease, allergies, they could all potentially benefit from the reintroduction of helminths, which is so interesting when you just think about it on a theoretical point scale, on a theoretical point of view.
Yeah. Well, like there's a really interesting proposed mechanism here for like why this is happening, right? Like, and I think that's amazing that you're pointing that out, right? Because there does seem to be this dysregulation, like you're mentioning, like we call them autoimmune diseases, and now there
Mm-hmm.
are, things that I disagree with semantically there and maybe definitively,
Mm-hmm.
but like at the end of the day, like the body seems to be kind of attacking itself
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
for no reason, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's what's kind of the understood part of it, but there's
Mm-hmm.
obviously a reason. There's
There is a
obviously
reason.
like
There is
nothing
a
happens
reason.
at random. Yeah.
Yes. So yeah,
Yeah.
I would argue that the reason is I am not entirely sure that the body is attacking itself or it's reacting to external stimuli like food, inflammatory bowel
Sure.
disease, or other things in other autoimmune diseases. I would argue that it's not necessarily random, and it's maybe not even necessarily the body attacking itself, but the body is used to, because through evolution, used to attacking helminths. And when there's no helminths there, there's nothing to modulate, there's nothing for the body to attack, and autoimmune disease can occur.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's like a dysregulation, right? It's like the
Mhm.
body doesn't understand
Mhm.
it doesn't understand how to interact with its internal environment maybe, right? Because there's sort of this missing piece, this missing component. And you're mentioning kind of a lot of interesting evidence that this is sort of a regulatory aspect of the body's internal environment, right?
Yeah.
Really highlighting this symbiotic relationship, right? This really
Yeah.
beautiful, helpful relationship going on between sort of our detoxification, healing pathways of the
Mhm.
body
Mhm.
and these sort of microbes, macro, whatever,
Mhm.
parasites, and
Yeah, not microbes.
yeah, I think that's really cool because no, not microbes.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I'd just be so curious to even take it to that level. Just kind of, thinking of interested like areas of interest, I guess,
Mhm.
like deficiencies in other sort of microorganisms or
Mhm.
parasites, relating them to other, you know, diseases like this in this sort of category. But you're kind of suggesting that even helminths themselves are associated with a lot of different types of illness, right? Like
Yeah,
that's so
yes. I wanted to say that I've actually read some research that says that the researchers believe that the future of healthcare will require people to be exposed to helminths because healthcare is going to be too expensive without it. Autoimmune diseases are a huge financial burden to the healthcare system, not to mention to people's quality of life. Now, whether or not that is the true intention of the healthcare system, it remains to be debated. But I have read research that argues that possibly insurance companies, possibly the future of human healthcare will involve the consistent exposure to helminths because yeah, like what you talk about in your content basically that um if if we like the relationship between us and parasites is probably mostly symbiotic, and if we can't understand that, our body is going to become less diverse and more susceptible to disease and less close to ideal health is really what I believe. Now, not all aspects of nature are going to be 100% beneficial, of course. And
Mhm.
I think that there can be a really beautiful mix of modern technology, modern, especially acute medical technology, and Helminthic therapy and the use of natural immune modulators that may help us deal with autoimmune disorders on a large global scale. Oh no, I hope my internet's still there.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Just amazing. And I think I agree. So I'm really curious, like the Helminthic therapy that you're kind of doing, you're using like patches and introducing them to the body,
Mm-hmm.
um
Mm-hmm.
like topically, like through the
Mm-hmm.
skin, they're kind of coming in, and
Mm-hmm.
so like how does that kind of work from that aspect?
Yeah, sure. So there are four different types of helminths currently used in the therapy. I use two of the kinds. I use TSO, Trichuris suis ova, and a NA, Nicator americanus human hookworm. So the type that you're referring to, which is where I put a bandage on my arm, and you may have seen my Instagram content on Let's Heal IBD about this. I just put a patch on my arm that contains the I'd get a liquid vial, put the liquid vial, which contains the Helminth larva, so the hookworm larva in it. I put it on the patch, put it on my skin. Now those hookworms, they go through my skin, join my bloodstream, go into my lungs where they stay for 4 or 5 days, go into their next stage, which I think is L2. They grow a little bit, and then they drop into your esophagus, into your stomach, where they go and live in your small intestine in the case of NA. So interesting. And the other kind of worm that I take, the other type of helminth that I take is
So
a little bit
cool.
more simple. It's a little vial that I get, and it's a liquid. And I just literally take that orally, and I take that one every 2 weeks, and I take the other one on my arm every 3 months. And yeah, it's pretty simple. And it's, yeah, pretty easy to do, actually. That's definitely one of the key takeaways.
Yeah, it does. It sounds pretty easy, especially when you're dealing with sort of these unmanageable conditions as well that are so debilitating, right? It's really, really difficult things to deal with. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, not medical advice in
Mm-hmm.
any way, but sort of
Mm-hmm.
just your opinion, right? And maybe
Mm-hmm.
backed up by some literature. What age would you start, like, would this be introduced in your opinion? Like how young could you start
Mm-hmm.
this? Like hypothetically, you're living in a city in a really sterile
Mm-hmm.
environment, and you're not exposed to helminths, and somebody wants to kind of do some of this external or this sort of extra therapy. When would you even start that? What do you think?
Um, I definitely think it's important to talk about this not being medical advice. I do not know enough to, or I don't even know if anyone knows enough to really give advice specifically for children on this topic. But I know people who use Helminthic therapy for their
Sure.
severe autoimmune conditions, and they give it to their children because they know and they understand that exposure to probably
Hmm.
specifically human hookworm is essential for human immune function. And I know they're giving them to their young children. I don't know the age or the quantity, but
Yeah.
if I was to have children, I would expose them to Helminths, definitely, especially between the ages. I actually
Very
read a
interesting.
paper recently that shows that um, metabenzenol, I'm going to say the name wrong, but it's an anti-helminthic drug. Exposure to this drug between the ages of 1 and 5 can does increase the likelihood of an ulcerative colitis, which is a type of inflammatory bowel disease. So they would argue that early childhood
No.
exposure between the ages of 1 and 5 can reduce your risk of autoimmune disease. Now, that's the only paper I've ever seen that had specific ages, but I have read other papers that do argue that um, ch- uh, early parasite exposure, specifically helminths, um, does decrease your chances of getting autoimmune disease as an adult.
Hmm. Oh, so cool. Yeah, I think that's why this is really on the forefront, right? And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
that's really interesting. Really curious, like we kind of grazed over this a little bit here, but like how do you increase it naturally in your environment? Because I feel like long term, kind of addressing the root cause of things, obviously the deficiency in your environment is a big problem. Should we
Mm.
like, poop outside every once in a while or, should like what's the deal there?
um, I think that's a super complex question that has a very complex answer that probably involves the complete restructure of our society, because I actually don't think that we could increase the natural exposure to helminths and consider and can continue to live in modern day society. I don't think it's possible because it's probably not safe. Because for humans to live, what's the population of the world right now? 7.5 billion people.
Interesting.
If we need to
Interesting.
decrease the quality of hygiene that's required in order to allow natural helminth exposure, we would have an outbreak of lots of other prolific, and I wouldn't necessarily argue worse than some autoimmune diseases because I've really suffered from Crohn's, but equally prolific and horribly consequential for global society. I don't really think it's a good idea. And that's not really what I'm here to argue. Although I do
Yeah.
think that if the
Yeah.
population allowed it, ideal human health would be achieved by humans living out in nature. I do agree with that theory, but due to the current state of our world, I really don't think that it's
Mhm.
possible.
Oh, and that's a fair point. That's a really
Mm-hmm.
fair point, and I think that's sort of an interesting thing to explore too, right? Because obviously living in your own filth, like at the quantity that they did, if you look back in history, like when we started living in cities, it was very important to get the filth out and get clean water in,
Totally.
right? And not
Totally.
having that system in place really did lead to a lot of disease because you had
Mm-hmm.
this huge
Mm-hmm.
imbalance
Mm-hmm.
in the amount of filth that you lived in. When
Mm-hmm.
you're
Mm-hmm.
living in a tribal setting and you're
Totally.
semi-nomadic, you're pooping and you're moving,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's in
Yeah.
the environment, but you're
Mm-hmm.
also moving around. You're not living in your own filth, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so I think that's a really important point, like, we can't just start pooping in the sidewalks, right? Like that's not a good idea at all.
I think the consequences of that would be very bad.
Yeah, I think so too.
Mm-hmm.
I think so too.
Mm-hmm.
Really cool. So, is there anything that you would like to add to this conversation? Something that we might not
Mm.
have covered so far, like something that you kind of want to end on, maybe some final
Mm.
thoughts. Now might be the time to kind of discuss that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I definitely still have, I have so much to say on this subject. I think this is such an important thing to talk about. Um, I do think that there's probably a little bit more to say about the practical application of the therapy. I think that it's important to understand the 4 different types of helminths that are used in the therapy. All provide, all have different unique characteristics, and to educate yourself on the therapy is probably the first and most important step. Um, it's important to understand, maybe most importantly, if you were to consider doing a therapy like this, if there's any listeners who have autoimmune disease and are thinking, hey, this sounds logical, I'm interested, it's really important to remember that probably due to the way that helminths work, because of their ability to not suppress the immune system like modern day pharmaceuticals, but actually modulate and change how it works long term, or as long as we are exposed to helminths, helminthic therapy takes a long time to work. And I can talk about my own personal experiences, but also just clinically, it's been shown. And part of the reason why helminths don't always show benefit in clinical trials, I think this is also important to remember. Many clinical trials into helminths are only 12 weeks long, or into anything are only 12 weeks long. And helminths don't provide benefit in 12 weeks. It's not enough time. Um, in my personal experience, I waited 25 full weeks before I saw any changes at all. And it wasn't until month 10 into the therapy that I really started to see any benefit at all. At month 11, I was in clinical remission from Crohn's disease, shown by blood and stool sample. And now it's been over 6 months, almost 8 months, I think. And I have been in remission the whole time. This is the longest I've ever been in remission for my whole entire adult life. I've been sick basically the entire time I've been an adult. So it's pretty significant for me. Um, but yeah, I think it's really important to remember, if you are going to consider this, that this is not a short-term fix. This is a long-term way to manage autoimmune disease. I do want to talk about some common misconceptions with Helminthic therapy and with parasite exposure, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners would be interested in hearing. One of the most common questions I get asked is, if if I'm doing helminths, can I give it to my boyfriend? Can I give it to my girlfriend? Can I give it to my friends? What's going to happen if some people do helminths and some people don't want to? Um, and you actually asked me this question before the interview. Is there any ethical issues involved in this? Um, so it's important to remember that the 4 species of helminth used in the therapy cannot be easily or even possibly transmitted between people. There are specific, unless we all start pooping outside in soil that can grow helminths. So, for example, if you poop outside in Canada, it's not going to happen because they're going to die. The soil isn't adequate. The temperature isn't adequate. They need to grow, human hookworm specifically needs to grow under certain conditions for days at a time. So it's not going to happen in modern day society if you go in the toilet. And the other the other species of helminth used in the therapy need to be grown almost in a laboratory. They are not transmittable because they are not human hookworms. They are actually animal helminths, sorry. Which are evolved to live inside of a animal. So one of the species of one of the species of helminth that I take is a pig whipworm. So it's actually evolved to live inside a pig, and we could and would be naturally exposed to this helminth by living with livestock. We used to almost all have livestock living inside of our houses or be exposed to it throughout our life. We may be exposed to this helminth that way. So this helminth, you cannot give it to someone else. It's impossible, and it needs to be grown in a laboratory. It's basically impossible to transmit it accidentally. But because it's a non-human helminth, it needs to be redosed more frequently because it's not evolved to live inside the human body like the human hookworm, the NA, the one I take on my skin. That one has evolved to live inside the human body and can therefore live a bit longer, and you don't need to redose as frequently.
Cool. Yeah, I think there's a couple of things I kind of want to just touch on
Mm-hmm.
there before we wrap things up.
Mm-hmm.
I think the point about clinical trials is really important amongst all of
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
all of like natural medicines,
Yes.
because often it's the long road. It's the hard road, and it's not the easy road. It's not a magic bullet, because especially with what you're discussing here and kind of the proposed mechanism is like your body has to relearn to live in this balance. It needs to learn how to interact with these helminths, things of that nature, right? It really is like a relearning, right? It's a
Totally.
process. And I mean, anybody that heals naturally, oftentimes, it's more than 12 weeks, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
when you're talking about chronic illnesses, right? These are illnesses that in kind of my school of thought, develop over long periods of time, right? So maybe it's
Totally.
a 10, 15, 20 years in the making.
Mm-hmm.
You're not just going to heal that naturally in a week or 12
No.
weeks for that matter. It might
Mm-hmm.
take, who knows, a
Mm-hmm.
year, right? It could
Mm-hmm.
take hopefully less, and
Mm-hmm.
depends on probably other habits as well. But I think that's a really important point. My other point is the shared environments. I mean, this is something I think about all the time. Your microbiome, your whole, your parasite exposure, whatever, the things that we can't see with the naked eye. Maybe some of them we can, like you're talking about here, but um, you know, it's really important. Like, we did live with these animals, right? Like, I go to the
Mm-hmm.
farm and I
Mm-hmm.
share 100% a microbiome with the
That's
cows and the
awesome.
pigs and the chickens at the farm.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't deworm, he doesn't vaccinate, he doesn't do anything like
Amazing.
this. Really, really great farmer, really pure. And I think that probably is a really big contributing factor. Even going, I go and he'll tour me around the barn, and it'll be like, here's some new cows. I got these new cows. Look how pretty they are. And I touch them, and I, like, you know what
Mm-hmm.
I mean? Like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
interacting with the animals as well. Even though
So
I'm not a
important.
farmer, I'm just going to pick them up. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm also in the barn, breathing in the air,
Mm-hmm.
and it smells like shit. And like,
That shit's
that's the
important.
reality, right? Like, it's a natural thing though. It's totally natural. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
Yeah,
think what
really, really amazing stuff. Anything that you want to end on here before we kind of wrap things up, or?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I'll just say one thing about the clinical trials that you said, because I think it is really important. If someone were to Google helminths, the clinical trials done into helminthic therapy are going to be difficult. Okay. And honestly, the results have been mixed. Many show inconclusive results, specifically with inflammatory bowel disease, although one specific clinical trial done into TSO showed that 73% of IBD patients showed a response. Oh no, sorry. 78 showed a response to the helminths, an improvement in their symptoms, and 73 went into clinical remission from TSO exposure, which is massive. And that was one of the papers that actually convinced me to try the therapy. But there have been lots of other therapies that show inconclusive results, mainly,
Wow.
mainly due to lack of funding, basically because of how our clinical trials and medical industry are set up. There has been lots of animal studies, theoretical research done into showing how and why helminths work, how and why they help with autoimmune disease. And the next logical step is then for a pharmaceutical company to say, hey, I'm going to make money from that. I'm going to make a drug from that, then fund a large scale clinical trial. But helminths are a living creature that in 2 of the 4 helminths used, you can grow at home by yourself. it's a very hard industry to make money off of. And that is probably the
Yeah.
biggest hindrance in holding back Helminthic therapy from becoming widespread. It is a very hard therapy to make large scale money from. And of course, that means people are suffering as a result because the science is actually there showing how and why it works. But large scale human clinical trials cost tens of millions of
Mhm.
dollars. And the only way that this can be funded is if either a government intervenes or a large pharmaceutical company can afford to fund this product that then can be then sold. So I think that's a really important thing to talk about. Um, and I think it's actually going to
Yeah.
probably change. It really affects modern
Yeah.
medicine and how what we actually have access to, which a lot of people don't really realize.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
I wouldn't hold our breath for the funding there, but
no,
let's let's hope that let's hope it goes in the right direction.
that does lead me to the point of what I'm trying to say, and what I will finish by saying is that basically the good news is for those of us with inflammatory bowel diseases and other autoimmune diseases, we don't really have to wait for pharmaceutical companies to provide this therapy for us, because there are thousands of people currently self-treating with Helminths and successfully managing over 100 different autoimmune diseases, anywhere from MS to IBD. There are people who are doing this. There is information out there if you're interested. And yeah, like I have an Instagram page called Let's Heal IBD that I spread awareness and information about Helminths, about the therapy. I share my personal experience, my health updates, everything like that. I recommend anyone who wants to learn about the therapy to check it out. Um, this Another extremely important resource is a collection of both anecdotal and researched information on Helminthic therapy. It's called the Helminthic Therapy Wiki. It is a user created database of information about Helminths, and it's the link that I sent you, and I'll make sure to send it after so that you listeners can look at it. But it basically has all of the information that someone who wants to learn about the therapy needs. It has hundreds of research papers, hundreds of personal testimonials. It is a gold mine of information. And I definitely recommend anyone who wants to know about the therapy checking out those two resources and sending me a message if they want to learn about it, because that's why I've created the page. And I've basically become obsessed with the idea that lack of Helminth exposure in genetically susceptible people factored with other important factors as well. But that's probably the reason that we have autoimmune disease. And reintroducing Helminths to the body is actually pretty easy, relatively accessible, and it's available now. So that's the message I want to get across to people.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. Well, listen, Kyla, it's been a pleasure. It's been a fantastic conversation, such an interesting topic.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, a lot to chew on here, a lot to think about,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it ties in really well with the whole terrain movement. So I'm eager to kind of see how it develops moving forward. I'm eager to
Mm-hmm.
learn more from you. You mentioned
Mm-hmm.
your Instagram. We'll put the link down below. Any other areas that the listener can reach you, websites or anything like that?
I do have a website that I don't really maintain. It's called Let's Heal IBD. You're welcome to check it out. But really, my Instagram page is the resource that I maintain myself, and the Helminthic Therapy Wiki is maintained by another community of people.
Amazing. Well, Kyla, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate all the wisdom and knowledge that you shared today. This was really fun. Can't wait for the next one.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and yeah, good luck and see you later.
Yeah. I want to thank you all for listening. You should all know that this is not medical advice. It's for your informational purposes only, but also remember that we're all sovereign, responsible beings capable of thinking, criticizing, and understanding absolutely anything. We, the people in the greater forest, are together self healers, self governable, self teachers, so much more. Please reach out if you have any questions, criticisms, comments, concerns, whatever it is. Find me on Instagram, email me, leave a comment. Any of that, I'll get back to you at some point. And listen, I really appreciate you guys taking the time out of your day to listen. If you did enjoy this content, Give us a like, share, comment, subscribe, follow, review, rating, anything you got to do on the platform you're on to help us grow and support the show would be really appreciated. Sharing is always the best way. And just remember, guys, there are two types of people in the world: those believe they can, those believe they can't, and they are both correct. Thanks for listening. Take care.